When billionaire CEO Alexander Sterling found her scrubbing floors at 2 a.m. in a gas station outside nowhere, exhausted but still humming softly to herself, he knew he'd finally found what his empire couldn't buy, a woman whose light shined brighter than all his wealth combined. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Gas and Go flickered like dying stars against the midnight darkness of Millfield, Oklahoma, population 847 and shrinking every year. Ruby Mae Johnson pushed a strand of honey-colored hair behind her ear and continued mopping the linoleum floor, her movement steady despite the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. At 19, Ruby worked 3 jobs, morning shifts at the local diner, afternoons cleaning houses for the few wealthy families in the county, and midnight to dawn at Murphy's. The pay barely covered her grandmother's medical bills and the mortgage on their tiny farmhouse, but Ruby had learned long ago that complaining wouldn't change anything. Hard work might. Another exciting Friday night in paradise, she murmured to herself, wringing out the mop. Through the window, she could see the empty highway stretching toward the interstate, a ribbon of possibility that led to cities she'd never seen and dreams she couldn't afford to chase. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Sarah. "Girl, you're 19. Come to Jake's party. Live a little." Ruby smiled sadly, typing back, "Can't afford to live a little. Grandma's medication is due Monday." The response came quickly, "Ruby, you're going to work yourself to death. There has to be another way." But Ruby knew better. In Millfield, there were no scholarships for girls whose grades suffered because they fell asleep in class after working all night. No fairy godmothers to rescue farm girls whose fathers had died in Iraq and whose mothers had abandoned them with an aging grandmother. There was just work, and more work, and the slim hope that somehow, someday, things might get better. Have you ever felt like you're working toward a dream that seems impossible to reach? Tell us about a time you kept pushing forward when everyone said to give up. Your story might inspire someone who needs hope tonight. 1,500 miles away in Manhattan, Alexander Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, looking down at the city that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. At 28, he had everything money could buy, a media empire that spanned 3 continents, homes in 12 countries, and a black card with no spending limit. What he didn't have was peace. "The Cartwright merger documents are ready for your signature," his assistant Marcus announced, entering with yet another stack of papers that would add another $100 million to his net worth. Alexander nodded absently, his reflection ghost-like in the window. Behind him, his phone buzzed with the usual notifications, another supermodel sliding into his DMs, another socialite hoping to become the next Mrs. Sterling, another shallow conversation about yacht parties and charity galas where everyone cared more about being photographed than the actual cause. "Sir?" Marcus prompted. "The documents?" "Tell me something, Marcus," Alexander said without turning around. "In all the women I've dated, how many do you think actually knew my middle name?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I couldn't say, sir. It's James. After my grandfather, the man who taught me that character matters more than contracts." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "But I bet you could ask any of them about my net worth, and they'd know it down to the last million." The irony wasn't lost on him. His wealth had given him access to everything except the one thing he wanted most, someone who would love Alexander James Sterling, not Sterling Media Corporation. His grandmother's words echoed in his memory, spoken just before she died, "Alexander, baby, all that money is going to feel mighty cold on a lonely night. Find yourself a girl who'd love you if you didn't have a penny to your name. That's when you'll know it's real." But where did a billionaire find authenticity in a world where everyone wanted something from him? His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed James Chen, private investigator. "Sterling here. Mr. Sterling, I have an update on your request about expanding into rural markets. I've been driving through small towns across the Midwest, and I think I found something interesting. There's this town in Oklahoma, Millfield. Economic depression, but the people here, they've got something. Real community, real values. Might be worth your time to see it firsthand." Alexander's interest sharpened. His latest business venture involved investing in underserved communities, but maybe this could be more than just business. Maybe it could be the escape from his gilded cage that he'd been seeking. "Send me the address," he said. "I think I need a road trip." 2 days later, Alexander Sterling, heir to billions and master of boardrooms, climbed into a rented pickup truck, traded his designer suits for jeans and a plain t-shirt, and headed toward Oklahoma with only one goal: to see what the real world looked like when you stripped away the wealth and pretense. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever in a gas station at 2 a.m., thanks to a girl who hummed while she worked and whose smile could light up the darkest night. As Ruby finished mopping and moved on to restocking the coolers, she caught herself humming an old country song her grandmother used to sing, something about love finding you when you least expect it. She laughed at herself. In Millfield, Oklahoma, at 2 a.m. in a gas station, the only thing likely to find her was trouble or another customer wanting cigarettes and energy drinks. If only she knew that 300 miles away, a lonely billionaire was driving through the night toward his destiny. At 2:17 a.m., Ruby was restocking the coffee machine when she heard the rumble of an unfamiliar engine pulling into Murphy's lot. Through the glass doors, she saw a pickup truck, clean but not flashy, the kind a rancher might drive to town on business. But when the driver stepped out, Ruby's breath caught. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, the man was striking. Tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair slightly mussed from travel and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were simple: jeans, boots, a navy t-shirt, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he was accustomed to command. More concerning was the fact that he looked completely lost. Alexander had been driving for 8 hours, following GPS directions that had apparently led him into the middle of nowhere. His phone showed no signal, his gas tank was nearly empty, and according to the navigation system, he was still 40 miles from Millfield. This tiny gas station was literally the only sign of life he'd seen in the past hour. He pushed through the glass doors, a small bell announcing his arrival, and stopped short. The girl behind the counter looked up from her restocking, and Alexander felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, calculated way of the women in his usual circles. Her beauty was natural, unguarded, honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, clear blue eyes that held both kindness and wariness, a face that looked like it smiled easily despite the exhaustion he could see in the set of her shoulders. But it was her reaction to seeing him that really caught his attention. No recognition, no calculation, no immediate attempt to impress. Just a genuine, warm smile and a soft, "Good morning. You're up late." "Morning," Alexander replied, his voice rougher than usual. "I think I'm lost." "Looking for Millfield?" Ruby's smile widened. "Well, you found it, sort of. Town's about 5 miles that way," she pointed east, "but nothing's open except here." "You passing through or?" "Business trip," Alexander said, which was technically true. "Mind if I get some coffee? It's been a long drive." "Of course. Fair warning though, it's been sitting for a while. I can make fresh if you don't mind waiting." The offer surprised him. In his world, service came with expectations, strings attached. But this girl was offering to go out of her way for a stranger at 2 a.m. with no agenda beyond basic kindness. "Fresh would be great, thank you." As Ruby busied herself with the coffee machine, Alexander found himself studying her. She moved with quiet efficiency, humming softly under her breath, the same melody he'd heard as he approached the station. There was something peaceful about watching her work, something that made the knot of constant tension in his chest begin to loosen. "You work here often?" he asked, immediately realizing how stupid the question sounded. Ruby laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Every night, unfortunately." "Well, not unfortunately, I need the job. But yeah, midnight to 6, 5 days a week. That's got to be rough. Don't you? I mean, aren't you tired?" She paused in her coffee preparation, glancing at him with curiosity. Most people didn't ask about her well-being. Most people barely saw her at all. "Tired's just a feeling," she said simply. "Can't pay bills with feelings." The matter-of-fact way she said it hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. Here was someone who understood real struggle, real responsibility, in a way his privileged life had never required. No complaints, no self-pity, just quiet determination. "What about dreams?" he asked before he could stop himself. "What do you want to do when you're not here?" Ruby's hand stilled on the coffee pot. The question was so unexpected, so genuine, that for a moment she forgot to be guarded. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said quietly. "Elementary school. I love kids, and I think maybe I could make a difference. Help kids who come from places like this see that there's more out there if they're willing to work for it." "Wanted?" Alexander caught the past tense. "What changed?" "Life," Ruby said with a shrug, but he could see the pain she was trying to hide. "My grandma got sick. Medical bills. The farm. Sometimes dreams have to wait for more practical things." She poured the coffee into a large cup and handed it to him, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The touch was electric, completely unexpected, and from the way her eyes widened slightly, Alexander knew she felt it too. How much do I owe you? He asked, though money suddenly felt crass and inadequate. $50. Alexander reached for his wallet and realized he only had hundreds. He'd forgotten to get smaller bills before leaving the city. Ruby's eyes widened as he pulled out a $100 bill. Oh, I can't make change for that, she said, clearly embarrassed. The register doesn't have enough. Keep it, Alexander said without thinking. Ruby stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Sir, I can't take $100 for a cup of coffee. That's more than I make in a whole shift. The words hung in the air between them, highlighting the impossible gulf between their worlds. Alexander realized his mistake. In trying to be generous, he'd made her feel small. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to. Look, do you have Venmo or something? I can send you the exact amount. Ruby shook her head. No smartphone. Just this old thing. She held up a flip phone that looked like it was from 2010. Alexander's heart clenched. Of course she didn't have a smartphone. Of course she couldn't afford the monthly payments for data plans and all the little luxuries he took for granted. Tell you what, he said, struck by sudden inspiration. I'll drink a lot of coffee. Make it 10 cups, and we'll call it even. Ruby laughed despite herself. Sir, that much caffeine will kill you. Then I'll die happy, Alexander said, and was rewarded with another one of her genuine smiles. What's your name? Ruby. Ruby Mae Johnson. Ruby Mae, Alexander repeated, liking the way it sounded. I'm Alex. Not Alexander Sterling, heir to billions. Not Mr. Sterling, CEO of Sterling Media. Just Alex. When was the last time he'd introduced himself so simply? Well, Alex, you seem nice, but I really can't take your money for nothing. How about this? You can have the coffee, and if you're still in town tomorrow, maybe you can tell me about wherever you came from. It's been a while since I talked to someone from the outside world. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most unexpected places. Have you ever met someone who changed your perspective in just one conversation? Share your story. We love hearing about those magical human moments that remind us we're all connected. The simple request hit Alexander harder than any multi-million-dollar business proposal ever had. She didn't want his money. She wanted his stories, his time, his attention. She wanted to know him, not what he could give her. I'd like that, he said softly. I'd like that a lot. They talked for the next hour, with Ruby cleaning and restocking while Alex sat at one of the small tables, nursing his coffee. She told him about growing up on the farm, about her grandmother who raised her after her father died in the war and her mother left for parts unknown. About the town that was slowly dying as young people left for bigger cities, about neighbors who still helped each other even when they had nothing to spare. Alex found himself sharing too, carefully, without revealing his true identity, but more honestly than he had with anyone in years. He talked about feeling lost despite having everything, about wondering if he was making any real difference in the world, about the loneliness that came from never knowing if people liked you or what you represented. You know what I think? Ruby said as she wiped down the counter, her shift nearing its end. I think you're running from something. But maybe instead of running away, you should be running toward something. Like what? Like whatever makes you feel the way you did when you walked in here tonight, she said simply. Lost, but not hopeless. Like you were looking for something you didn't even know you needed. Alexander stared at her, this 19-year-old girl in a gas station uniform who somehow saw straight through to his soul. She was right. He had been looking for something, authenticity, connection, purpose beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. And somehow, impossibly, he'd found it here in Ruby Mae Johnson. As the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, Alex knew he had a choice to make. He could get in his truck, drive back to Manhattan, and pretend this night never happened. Or he could stay and see where this unexpected connection might lead. Looking at Ruby as she hummed and worked, completely unself-conscious and genuine in a way that took his breath away, the choice was easier than any business decision he'd ever made. He was staying. Ruby Mae, he said as she prepared to close out the register. Would you like to have breakfast with me? I mean, if you're not too tired after your shift? She looked up, surprised. Breakfast? I know it's forward, and I'm basically a stranger, but... Alex paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound completely insane. I feel like I've been sleepwalking through life for years, and tonight I finally woke up. I'd like to stay awake a little longer, if you'll let me. Ruby studied his face in the growing daylight, seeing something there that made her heart flutter in a way she'd never experienced. This man, Alex, was clearly not from her world. Everything about him suggested money, education, opportunities she'd never had. But there was something genuine in his eyes, something lonely that called to the lonely parts of her own heart. Okay, she said softly. But I should warn you, The only place open for breakfast is Mabel's Diner, and it's not exactly fancy. Alex's smile could have powered the entire town. Ruby May, I can honestly say that fancy is the last thing I want right now. As they walked out of Murphy's Gas and Go together, Ruby had no idea that she'd just said yes to breakfast with one of the most powerful men in America. And Alex had no idea that he'd just taken the first step toward the only decision that would ever truly matter. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mabel's Diner looked exactly like what Alex had expected from a small-town breakfast spot: red vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the kind of coffee that could wake the dead. What he hadn't expected was how perfectly Ruby fit into this world, greeting every person who walked in by name, asking about sick relatives and graduation ceremonies and farm harvests. "Ruby May, honey, you look tired," said Mabel herself, a woman in her 60s whose apron proclaimed her the world's best grandma. "You working too hard again?" "I'm fine, Mabel. Just brought a friend for breakfast." Ruby's cheeks flushed slightly as she introduced Alex. "This is Alex. He's visiting." Mabel's sharp eyes assessed Alex with the thoroughness of a woman who'd been reading people for 6 decades. His clothes were simple, but she noticed the quality of the fabric, the expensive watch he'd forgotten to remove, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to respect. "Visiting from where, son?" "New York," Alex said, earning a raised eyebrow from both women. "Long way from home," Mabel observed. "What brings you to Millfield?" Alex glanced at Ruby, who was looking at him with new curiosity. "Business," he said carefully. "But I'm starting to think I might extend my stay." Over pancakes and coffee that was somehow better than anything in his Manhattan office, Alex learned more about Ruby's life. She cared for her grandmother, who had early-stage dementia. She'd been valedictorian of her high school class but turned down a scholarship to Oklahoma State because she couldn't leave her grandma alone. She read voraciously, borrowing books from the tiny town library, and dreamed of traveling to places she'd only seen in pictures. "What about you?" Ruby asked, cutting into her short stack. "What kind of business are you in?" Alex hesitated. "Media," he said finally, which was true enough. "Communications, marketing, that sort of thing." "Sounds important," Ruby said with a smile. "And boring." Alex laughed, surprising himself. "It can be. But it pays the bills." "Must pay them pretty well," Ruby observed, nodding toward his watch. "That's a nice piece." Alex looked down at his Patek Philippe and mentally cursed himself. The watch cost more than most people in Millfield made in 2 years. "It was a gift," he said quickly. "From my boss. Work recognition thing." Ruby accepted the explanation with the trusting nature that made Alex's heart ache. She had no reason to doubt him, no experience with the kind of casual deception that wealth required in his world. They spent the morning walking around Millfield's tiny downtown, Ruby pointing out landmarks with the pride of someone who loved her home despite its limitations. The library where she'd read every book twice. The school where she'd graduated valedictorian. The park where her father had taught her to ride a bike before he deployed. "It's not much," Ruby said as they sat on a bench overlooking the small pond that served as the town's centerpiece. "I know it must seem pretty pathetic compared to New York." "Ruby, it's beautiful," Alex said, and meant it. Not because of the scenery, but because he was seeing it through her eyes, the way she noticed everything, appreciated everything, found joy in simple things he'd stopped seeing years ago. "You're just being nice." "I'm not." Alex turned to face her fully. "In New York, I can't walk down the street without someone wanting something from me. Here, with you, I feel like myself. Like the person I was before life got complicated." Ruby studied his face, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken. "What happened? To make your life complicated?" Before Alex could answer, his phone, the one he'd put on silent but couldn't bring himself to turn off completely, buzzed with an emergency notification. Then another. And another. Ruby watched his expression change as he glanced at the screen, saw the easy smile replaced by tension, the relaxed posture shift to alertness. "I'm sorry," Alex said, standing abruptly. "I need to take this. Work emergency." Ruby nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach as she watched him walk away, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, she could see the change in him, the way he stood straighter, spoke with authority, commanded attention even when talking to an empty park. Alex's assistant Marcus was panicked. "Sir, where are you?" "The board meeting with the Japanese investors was moved to this afternoon. They're threatening to pull out if you're not there. We're talking about a $2 billion deal." "Reschedule it," Alex said automatically. "Sir, we can't. They're flying back to Tokyo tonight. This is the only window." Alex closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his responsibilities crushing down on him. $2 billion. Hundreds of jobs. Investor confidence in his leadership. Fine. I'll leave now. Should be there in. He calculated driving time, 8 hours if I don't stop. Sir, I've already arranged for the jet to pick you up in Oklahoma City. You can be here in 3 hours. The jet? Alex glanced back at Ruby, who was watching him with growing concern. No, I'll drive. Mr. Sterling, with respect, this isn't the time for road trips. The company needs you. Mr. Sterling. The name hung in the air, and Alex realized he'd been loud enough for his voice to carry. When he turned around, Ruby was standing, her face pale. Ruby. Sterling, she said quietly. As in Sterling Media? As in, you're Alexander Sterling? The truth hung between them like a chasm. Alex could see the exact moment when Ruby's expression changed from confusion to hurt to something that looked almost like betrayal. You lied to me, she said simply. I didn't lie. I didn't tell you everything. You're a billionaire. Ruby's voice was flat, processing. You're Alexander Sterling. I've seen you on magazine covers at the grocery store. You own half the media companies in America. Ruby, please, let me explain. Explain what? She backed away from him, hurt evident in every line of her body. Explain why you thought it was funny to play pretend with the poor country girl? Explain why you let me tell you about my problems when you could probably buy and sell this entire town. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Ruby's voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were slumming it for kicks. Having a laugh at the simple farm girl who was stupid enough to think someone like you could actually be interested in someone like me. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted wasn't who they claimed to be? Sometimes the truth comes out in the worst possible way. Share how you handled a moment when trust was broken. Your experience might help someone else navigate their own heartbreak. Alex felt his world tilting. Everything he'd felt in the past 12 hours, the connection, the peace, the sense of finding something real, was crumbling in front of him. Ruby, you have to understand. I didn't plan this. I didn't come here looking for you. But when I found you... He ran his hands through his hair, desperate to find words that would make her understand. When I found you, I found something I didn't even know I was missing. Right, Ruby said bitterly. A charity project. A feel-good story you can tell at your fancy dinner parties. Remember that time I slept with a gas station attendant? Don't you dare, Alex's voice turned sharp. Don't you dare cheapen what happened between us. What exactly happened between us? Ruby demanded. Because I thought I was getting to know Alex, a nice guy from New York who seemed lonely and kind. I had no idea I was being auditioned as the billionaire's temporary amusement. Alex's phone buzzed again. Marcus, probably wondering where he was. The board meeting. The Japanese investors. The $2 billion deal that could make or break the company's expansion into Asian markets. Ruby saw him glance at the phone and laughed, but there was no humor in it. Go ahead. Answer it. I'm sure whatever crisis needs the great Alexander Sterling is more important than explaining yourself to a nobody from Millfield. You're not a nobody, Alex said fiercely. You're the most real person I've ever met. You're brilliant and kind and strong and beautiful, and if you think your worth is measured by your bank account, then you understand less about value than I thought. Don't, Ruby whispered, tears starting to fall. Don't you dare lecture me about worth when you spent 12 hours lying about who you are. She turned and started walking away, back toward town, leaving Alex standing alone in the park with his phone buzzing incessantly and his heart breaking into pieces he didn't know how to put back together. Behind him, a car pulled up, a black sedan that looked completely out of place in Millfield. His security team, probably sent by Marcus when he couldn't reach Alex immediately. Mr. Sterling? The driver got out, professional and efficient. We're here to escort you to the airport. The jet is waiting. Alex looked at the car, then at Ruby's retreating figure, getting smaller in the distance. He thought about the board meeting, the investors, the empire that depended on his presence. Then he thought about the way Ruby had looked at him when she realized he'd been lying. He thought about his grandmother's words, find yourself a girl who'd love you if you didn't have a penny to your name. The problem was, Ruby Mae Johnson might have been that girl. But he'd never given her the chance to find out. His phone rang again. This time it was the board chairman himself. Alexander, where the hell are you? The Japanese are here, and they're asking questions about your leadership commitment. If you're not in this room in 2 hours, we're looking at the biggest deal failure in company history. Alex closed his eyes, feeling the weight of two worlds pulling him in opposite directions. In one direction lay everything he'd built, everything he was responsible for, everything that made him Alexander Sterling. In the other direction walked a girl who'd seen the man he could be, before she learned about the man he was. As Ruby disappeared around the corner, probably heading home to her grandmother and her 3 jobs and her simple, honest life, Alex made the first decision that felt truly his in years. He got in the car. But as they drove toward Oklahoma City and the private jet that would take him back to his real life, Alex stared out the window at the disappearing landscape and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Behind them, in Millfield, Ruby Mae Johnson sat on her front porch, crying for the first time in years, not for her circumstances, not for her struggles, but for the dream she'd allowed herself to have for exactly 12 hours. The dream of being loved for who she was, by someone who could have had anyone. The Sterling Media boardroom fell silent as Alexander finished his presentation to the Japanese investors. The $2 billion deal was signed, sealed, and celebrated with expensive champagne and congratulations all around. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. "Brilliant work, Alexander," said board chairman William Hartley, clapping him on the shoulder. "Though I have to say, you seem distracted. Everything all right?" Alex forced a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long few days." But tired didn't begin to cover it. For 3 weeks since returning from Oklahoma, Alex had thrown himself into work with manic intensity. 18-hour days, back-to-back meetings, 3 international trips. Anything to keep his mind off honey blonde hair and genuine laughter and the way Ruby's eyes had looked when she realized he'd been lying. His assistant Marcus approached with the usual stack of messages. "Sir, you have 17 interview requests about the Yamamoto deal, and Jennifer Caldwell from Vanity Fair wants to do a feature on America's Most Eligible Bachelor, Why Alexander Sterling Can't Find Love." The irony was bitter. He'd found love. He'd just been too much of a coward to fight for it. "Cancel them all," Alex said absently, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "I'm not in the mood for interviews." "Sir?" Marcus looked confused. Alex never turned down positive press. The Vanity Fair piece alone would be worth millions in brand positioning. Alex's phone buzzed with a news alert that made his blood freeze. Small town in crisis, Millfield, Oklahoma faces economic collapse as last major employer closes. His hands shook as he opened the article. Millfield, Oklahoma, population 847, is facing extinction after Henderson Manufacturing announced the closure of its local plant, effective immediately. The plant employed 200 people, nearly a quarter of the town's population, and its closure leaves the community devastated. "We're looking at a complete economic collapse," said Mayor Patricia Webb. Young people were already leaving for opportunities elsewhere. Now families with roots going back generations have no choice but to abandon their homes. The closure hits particularly hard for residents like Ruby Johnson, 19, who works multiple jobs to support her ailing grandmother. "I don't know what we'll do," Johnson said outside Murphy's Gas and Go, where she works the night shift. "My grandma can't travel, and I can't leave her. But there's no work left here." Alex's chest tightened as he read Ruby's quote. She was facing homelessness, and he was celebrating million-dollar deals in a Manhattan boardroom. The article continued with a photo that stopped his heart completely. Ruby, looking exhausted and defeated, standing outside the gas station where they'd met. The caption read, "Local resident Ruby Johnson represents the human cost of economic decline in rural America." But what made Alex's world tilt was the video embedded in the article, a local news segment that someone had posted to TikTok. The reporter was interviewing residents about the plant closure, and suddenly there was Ruby, fighting back tears as she talked about her grandmother's medical needs. "She raised me when nobody else would," Ruby said to the camera, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "I can't just abandon her now. We'll figure something out. We always do." The video had been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from sympathy to outrage about corporate greed destroying small communities. But it was the final comment that made Alex's blood run cold. "Wait, is this the same girl from that gas station story? The one who helped that billionaire? Ruby Johnson? OMG." Someone had connected the dots. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. "Remember the gas station girl? She's about to lose everything. Billionaire's mystery romance, where is Alexander Sterling now?" The fairy tale that wasn't, Ruby Johnson's heartbreak goes viral. Alex watched in horror as his private moment with Ruby became public entertainment. Someone had leaked details about his time in Millfield, probably a gas station customer who'd recognized him later. The story was everywhere, how he'd spent 12 hours with a small-town girl, how he'd lied about his identity, how he'd disappeared back to his billionaire life while she struggled in poverty. The internet's verdict was swift and brutal. He played with that poor girl's heart like it was a game. This is what's wrong with rich people, they think real people are their entertainment. Ruby Johnson deserves so much better than a lying billionaire. Alexander Sterling is officially cancelled. But the worst comment was from someone claiming to be Ruby's friend. Y'all don't know Ruby like we do. That girl believed in fairy tales for exactly one day. Now she won't even talk about what happened. He broke something in her that can't be fixed. Alex's phone rang immediately. His publicist, in full crisis mode. Alexander, we have a situation. The Ruby Johnson story is trending worldwide. Hashtag Justice for Ruby is the #1 hashtag. We need to control this narrative immediately. How? Alex asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Standard damage control. Issue a statement saying you met briefly, deny any romantic involvement, position it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. Absolutely not. Sir, your reputation. My reputation? Alex's voice turned cold. My reputation is that I'm a liar who plays with people's hearts for entertainment. And you know what? For once, my reputation is accurate. He hung up and immediately called his security team. I need you to find out everything about the situation in Millfield. Ruby Johnson specifically. I want to know how she is, what she needs, everything. 20 minutes later, his head of security called back with information that made Alex's heart sink even further. Sir, Ms. Johnson's grandmother was hospitalized yesterday. Complications from her dementia, plus stress from the plant closure. The medical bills are substantial. Ms. Johnson is looking at losing the family farm to pay for care. And Ruby? Working every available shift she can find, but with the plant closed, there's almost no work left in town. She's been asking around about selling her grandmother's wedding ring. Alex closed his eyes. Ruby was losing everything, her home, her future, possibly her grandmother, while he sat in a Manhattan penthouse making deals worth billions. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. All that money is going to feel mighty cold on a lonely night. But this wasn't about lonely nights anymore. This was about Ruby facing the kind of crisis that money could actually solve, while the man who loved her did nothing. Sometimes we realize too late that we've let pride or fear cost us the most important things in life. Have you ever had a moment where you knew you had to choose between what was safe and what was right? Share your story. Sometimes courage is contagious. Alex stood up abruptly, his decision crystallizing with startling clarity. Marcus, he called to his assistant. Cancel everything for the next month. Sir? Everything? The Morrison acquisition closes Friday, and the board meeting. Everything, Alex repeated firmly. And I need you to find me the contact information for Henderson Manufacturing. I want to speak to their CEO immediately. The company that just closed the Millfield plant? Sir, are you planning to? I'm planning to buy them, Alex said, already mentally calculating the logistics. The whole company. Today if possible. Marcus stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Sir, Henderson Manufacturing is worth $800 million. You're talking about acquiring an entire company to save one small town. Alex thought about Ruby's smile, about the way she hummed while she worked, about her dreams of teaching children and her fierce love for her grandmother. He thought about the girl who'd chosen kindness over mockery, authenticity over advantage, love over logic. No, he said quietly. I'm talking about acquiring a company to save the most important person in my life. As Alex began making the calls that would either save Ruby's town or cost him his board's confidence, he realized something that should have terrified him but instead filled him with peace. He didn't care about the business consequences anymore. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Sterling was about to do something purely for love. The only question was whether Ruby Mae Johnson would ever forgive him enough to let him try. 3 days later, Ruby was restocking shelves at Murphy's when she heard the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Through the window, she saw a convoy unlike anything Millfield had ever witnessed, black SUVs, a mobile news van, and vehicles filled with people in business suits. Her heart sank. Ever since the story had gone viral, reporters had been calling non-stop, trying to get her side of the billionaire romance that had captured the internet's attention. She'd refused every interview, just wanting the humiliation to end. But this looked bigger than a few reporters. The door chimed, and Ruby looked up to see Mayor Webb entering with an expression of barely contained excitement, followed by a group of people in expensive suits. And behind them, looking nervous but determined, was Alex. Ruby's breath caught. He looked different, older somehow, more serious, but his eyes held the same intensity she remembered from their night together. He was staring at her like she was water and he'd been dying of thirst. Ruby, honey, Mayor Webb said, her voice shaking with emotion, I need you to sit down for this. I'm fine standing, Ruby said carefully, her eyes never leaving Alex's face. What's going on? One of the suited men stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, I'm David Morrison from Morrison Legal. I represent Sterling Media Corporation and its subsidiaries." Ruby's stomach dropped. If this is about a lawsuit or something. Quite the opposite, Morrison interrupted with a smile. "I'm here to inform you that as of this morning, Sterling Media has acquired Henderson Manufacturing for $847 million. The words didn't make sense. Ruby stared at him blankly. "I'm sorry, what?" Furthermore, Morrison continued, Sterling Media has committed to not only reopening the Millfield plant but expanding operations to employ 400 people, double the previous workforce. The company will also be establishing a technical training center and providing full college scholarships for any Millfield resident who qualifies. Ruby felt the room spinning. That's not possible. Mayor Webb was crying openly now. "Ruby, it's true. Mr. Sterling bought the entire company. Every job is coming back. The town is saved." "But that's not all," Morrison said, pulling out another document. Sterling Media has also established the Ruby Mae Johnson Educational Foundation, with an initial endowment of $10 million, dedicated to providing teaching scholarships for young people from rural communities. Ruby's legs gave out, and she sank onto the stool behind the counter. "I don't understand. Why would?" She looked at Alex, who had remained silent through the entire presentation. He stepped forward slowly, his hands shaking slightly. "Because," Alex said quietly, 3 weeks ago, I met a girl who showed me what real courage looks like. What real love looks like. And I've spent every day since then trying to figure out how to be worthy of her." "Alex," Ruby whispered, tears starting to fall. "I know I lied to you," Alex continued, moving closer. "I know I hurt you, and I know buying your town doesn't erase that. But Ruby, when I saw that news article, when I learned you might lose everything." His voice cracked. "I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the power to help and did nothing." Ruby shook her head, overwhelmed. "You bought an entire company. For me. For you. For your grandmother. For this town that raised you and made you who you are." Alex was close enough to touch her now, but he kept his hands at his sides. "But mostly because I realized something these past 3 weeks. All my money, all my success, all my power, none of it means anything if I can't share it with the person I love." The gas station fell completely silent. Even Mayor Webb stopped crying to listen. "You love me?" Ruby asked, her voice barely audible. "I love you," Alex said simply. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I love that you see good in everyone and that you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I love that you make me want to be better than I am." Ruby stood up slowly, studying his face. "How do I know this isn't just guilt? How do I know you won't disappear again when the novelty wears off?" Alex reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, dropping to one knee right there in Murphy's Gas and Go. Ruby gasped, along with everyone else in the room. "Because I'm not going anywhere," Alex said, opening the box to reveal a stunning but surprisingly simple diamond ring. "Ruby Mae Johnson, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air like a miracle. Ruby stared at the ring, at Alex kneeling on the linoleum floor of the gas station where they'd met, at the crowd of townspeople who'd gathered to witness the impossible. "You're crazy," she whispered. "Crazy about you," Alex agreed. "I know it's fast. I know we have a lot to figure out. But Ruby, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my heart. You are my home. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the love you showed me that night." Ruby looked around at the faces watching her, Mayor Webb, her neighbors, her community that had just been saved from extinction. Then she looked back at Alex, seeing not the billionaire CEO but the lonely man who'd found peace in her simple kindness. "The ring is beautiful," she said softly, "but Alex." His face fell slightly. "But? I don't need a fairy tale proposal. I don't need grand gestures or million-dollar foundations." Ruby's smile was radiant as she reached down to touch his face. "I just need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter how big your world gets, you'll never forget what we found in this little gas station. Promise me you'll always be Alex, not just Alexander Sterling." Alex's smile could have lit up the entire town. "I promise. As long as you promise to keep me grounded when I forget." "Deal," Ruby said, and then, to the cheers of everyone watching, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Alex slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, and the gas station erupted in applause and tears and celebration like Millfield had never seen. This story proves that real love sees past circumstances to the heart underneath. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories start in the most ordinary places. What's the most unexpected place you've found something extraordinary? Share your story and remind us all that magic can happen anywhere. 6 months later, Ruby stood in the garden behind the farmhouse that Alex had helped her renovate, not replace, but lovingly restore to its original beauty. Her grandmother, whose health had dramatically improved with proper medical care and the joy of seeing Ruby happy, sat in her favorite chair, beaming as she watched the preparations. "You nervous, sweetheart?" Grandma Rose asked as Ruby adjusted her simple but elegant wedding dress. "Not nervous," Ruby said, looking out at the crowd gathered in their backyard. "Just grateful." The guest list was an impossible mix of worlds: Manhattan socialites sitting next to Oklahoma farmers, board members sharing tables with gas station attendants, celebrities mingling with Ruby's former classmates. But somehow, it all worked. Love, Ruby had learned, had a way of making the impossible feel natural. Alex appeared at her side, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo but somehow still looking like the lost man who'd wandered into her gas station that night. "Ready to become Mrs. Sterling?" he asked, taking her hand. "I've been ready since the moment you walked through those doors," Ruby said, then grinned. "Though I have to admit, I never imagined my wedding would be covered by entertainment tonight." Alex laughed. "We can still elope if you want. My jet's standing by." "And miss seeing Mabel cry through the entire ceremony?" "Not a chance." The wedding was everything Ruby had never dared to dream of: beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant but warm, a celebration that honored both of their worlds without sacrificing the authenticity that had brought them together. But the moment that would be shared millions of times across social media wasn't the kiss or the vows or the first dance. It was when Alex, during his speech, announced that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations at Sterling Media to focus on the educational foundation he and Ruby were building together. "My wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Ruby, "taught me that the most important work we can do isn't building empires, it's building up the people around us. She taught me that love isn't something you acquire, it's something you give." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ruby only had eyes for her husband, the man who'd chosen love over everything else his world valued. As they danced to their wedding song, a simple country ballad that Ruby's father had sung to her mother, Alex whispered in her ear, "Any regrets?" Ruby looked around at their guests, at the town that was thriving again, at the future stretching ahead of them full of possibilities she'd never imagined. Then she looked back at Alex, her Alex, who'd found her in the darkness of a gas station and brought light to her entire world. "Just one," she said with a mischievous smile. Alex's face fell slightly. "What? I wish I'd made you pay for all 10 cups of coffee that first night," Ruby laughed. "I could have retired on the tip." Alex's laughter joined hers, and as he spun her around the dance floor, Ruby reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. A year ago, she'd been a girl with 3 jobs and impossible dreams. Now she was a woman building schools and changing lives, married to a man who saw her worth when the rest of the world saw only her circumstances. The fairy tale was real. But more than that, it was theirs. And somewhere in the crowd, Mabel was indeed crying, while Mayor Webb live-streamed the reception and proclaimed to anyone who would listen that Millfield, Oklahoma was now officially the love story capital of the world. The last image that would cement the story's viral status was captured by a professional photographer but felt completely candid: Ruby and Alex, hours after the ceremony, sitting on the tailgate of an old pickup truck, still in their wedding clothes but barefoot.